This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today marks 4 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The war has displaced millions and killed thousands of civilians. Ongoing Russian attacks on the Ukrainian energy grid have knocked out power, leaving millions to face brutal cold for weeks at a time. Today, we'll talk about how a local humanitarian aid group is working to send food, toys, and medical supplies to Ukraine. That's later. And we'll also hear from one Connecticut resident who's been living in Ukraine since the start of the war. But first, U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal recently returned from Kyiv and Odessa. He joins us now to share what he saw. Thanks for joining us, Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you were just in Ukraine. Can you give us an idea of what you witnessed there?
I was in Ukraine last week, and it was really a very powerful experience. It had special meaning. I've been to Ukraine 9 times, and this one really reinforced for me the determination and courage of the Ukrainian people. They are going through unspeakable hardships with unstoppable bravery. And my takeaway from this visit to Kyiv and Odessa was they can win this war. In fact, they will win it if they have the weapons and economic aid that they need from Europe and the United States. We visited Kyiv, where people are living without electricity, heat, water, sometimes food, talking to the Minister of Energy, as well as President Zelensky, and then to Odessa in the midst of a blinding snowstorm, where we visited the Black Sea Defense Forces and talked to some of the American companies. Another takeaway, I was shocked to learn that Putin is targeting American businesses. Literally half of the 600 commercial operations, American businesses there, have been bombed, damaged, some destroyed by Putin very purposefully and intentionally. Bombing American businesses is an attack on America. So we ought to be outraged by this kind of inhumanity to Ukraine. It is cruelty beyond words. We met with children who have been abducted and rescued. There are 20,000 children in education camps or foster families in Russia kidnapped by Putin. This kind of inhumanity really ought to outrage Americans and prompt the kind of weapons and economic aid Ukraine needs to win this war.
Well, so many things there to sort of parse out. And you mentioned there's various different kinds of aid that's needed for Ukraine. And you are currently working to advance bills to put sanctions on Russia and to provide more support for Ukraine in the form of military equipment. But is this enough? Is that enough to bring an end to the war?
There's no single panacea. Keep in mind, Russia is making gains, but they are measuring those gains literally in square miles, costing tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of miles. To take the little town of Pokrovsk, if they do it, will take almost 200,000 casualties on the part of Russia. So Ukraine needs bodies to fight. It is providing that kind of manpower, but it needs Tomahawk missiles, air defense, Patriot interceptors, F-16s, 155 munitions, and an array of weapons that will help it hold the line in the Donetsk region and even push back. But it also needs economic sanctions to stop the flow of money to Russia's war machine from India, China, Brazil, Hungary, Turkey. They are the major purchasers of Russian oil and gas, and they are providing the economic wherewithal that Putin needs to wage this war. So it's a combination of weapons and economic aid that Ukraine needs. And that means also cracking down on the shadow fleet that transports oil and gas. It means using the seized assets, as they say, immobilized assets from Russia, more than 300 billion that are in European accounts. They're using some of it as collateral for loans, but there's no reason not to use that additional economic aid. It's an array of kind of support that Ukraine needs.
Well, and on top of the economic and weapons aid, as we've mentioned at the top of the hour, that the Ukrainian infrastructure has taken major hits over the last couple of years, with Russian forces continuing targeting the power grid, as we've just learned recently, that this results in civilians losing heat and power, sometimes for weeks on end, during a brutal cold winter. And on top of that, there have also been over 1,000 attacks on Ukrainian healthcare facilities. So you mentioned earlier that during your trip to Ukraine, you have seen children, you've seen families. I believe you visited a children's hospital and a power plant. Can you describe for us what you witnessed there, and what are some support that's needed to sort of rebuild the infrastructure?
We visited the Donetsk power plant, which has been hit not once, not twice, but multiple times. Literally, Putin is striking and targeting the sources of energy. In fact, every single non-nuclear generation source in Ukraine has been hit at least once. He hasn't hit the nuclear plants because he's hoping to take them over. And he knows that hitting them would potentially create a nuclear catastrophe. But every other source of electricity and power has been hit. And we tramped through the snow and saw the destruction at the generation plant, one of the main ones in Kyiv, which is absolutely appalling. But we also saw the electrical engineers at work in sub-freezing weather. Some of them have died. They are heroes. We visited a hospital, children's hospital in Kyiv, newly built and just destroyed. Literally, a pediatric physician was killed by this bombing attack. Children were saved. They were evacuated in time, but the hospital is devastated. And of course, at that hospital, we spoke with some of the abducted children who told us about how they were declared orphans after the Russian killed their parents and abducted into Russia to be placed in education camps or foster families. They were rescued by relatives or others who crossed enemy lines to get to them. And it is just breathtaking in the inhumanity and cruelty that Putin has wrought on this country. But there is this false narrative that Russia is winning, when in fact it can't sustain the war with its own casualties.
Well, there's so much violence happening there, and the New York Times recently released a report detailing mass sexual violence that Ukrainian women are subjected by Russian soldiers. And there are efforts to provide the nation with military equipment, as you've mentioned just now, Senator. But is there enough being done to protect civilians who have remained in the country?
Civilians are at risk throughout the country. They're at risk from the bombs and drones in every part of Ukraine. We were told what the procedures are for going to shelters. In the past, I have actually gone to some of the shelters when bombing began in Kyiv or Lviv. Anybody is at risk. And we were in a bunker in Odessa, where they are doing a lot of the defense interceptor work with radar and drones and other means. They've converted a Coast Guard vessels from the United States into a radar detector to help protect the people of Odessa. But the evidence of destruction is everywhere. And the stories of cruelty are not only from children, but also, as you said very aptly, from women who have been violated and abused by Russian soldiers with the encouragement of the Russian war machine and Vladimir Putin himself. The waging of war has advanced to a new state of cruelty, but the Ukrainians are endlessly ingenious. We visited a drone factory where they are turning out thousands of drones literally every year, dwarfing the number produced in the United States. They have an industrial capacity that is growing. They are innovative and creative in their use of the weaponry that is provided by European allies. And Europe, in fact, has stepped up in many ways, in a way that the United States has failed to do. So I came away really heartbroken for the suffering, which you've highlighted, but also very hopeful because the determination and grit and guts, their grace and dignity is undiminished on the part of the Ukrainian people.
Well, you're giving sort of a sense of optimism here, Senator. And earlier this month, among all the violence, there are peace talks that occurred in Geneva between Russia and Ukraine. You've also met with President Volodymyr Zelensky on your trip. Did he share anything about efforts to end the war?
He did. We talked at length, and he has a very realistic view of the prospects for peace. And let me give you my view. First, Putin has no interest in peace. Vladimir Putin is a thug. He's a mobster. He is ultimately responsible for all this cruelty and inhumanity. Volodymyr Zelensky is not only realistic, but he is hopeful as well. He is willing to talk about territory, but only with a guarantee of security. In effect, security is the linchpin, because without guarantees of security, an Article 5 type guarantee under NATO, Article 5 means an attack on one is an attack on all. Ukraine will be vulnerable to another invasion by Putin, like 2014, like 2022. This is not the fourth anniversary. It's really the 11th or 12th anniversary, because Putin began in 2014 and he will repeat it without a security guarantee. So Zelensky, very clear-eyed, believes that a security guarantee is absolutely necessary. And that is one of the hang-ups to the talks that have taken place so far. Vladimir Putin is totally resistant. He is unwilling to accept security guarantees or the stationing of European troops in any kind of demilitarized zone, or the establishment of a demilitarized zone that might be economic in nature. He wants to conquer Ukraine. And I think the vacillation by our president, Trump's allowing Putin to play him and mock the United States, has in fact reinforced Putin's belief that he can outlast us.
And Senator, I know you have to go, but is there anything that you would like to share or say to the Ukrainian American community here in Connecticut?
The Ukrainian American community has been so steadfast and strong. When I speak to President Zelensky on these trips, again, this one was my 9th or 10th, if you want to count going to Odessa after heading out to Moldova and Poland. Every time I've talked to him there or here or in Munich or elsewhere, he's emphasized how important the support of the Ukrainian American community is. And Carl and Myron, who will be joining us shortly, are the leaders of that effort. They have helped to keep hope alive here and galvanize the Ukrainian American community to provide aid, non-governmental organization aid. It's been so important to the Ukrainians, not just for its tangible effect, but the morale that it has helped to boost. So I thank all of our Ukrainian American community in Connecticut, throughout the country. I meet with them regularly. It's a source of inspiration to me, as is the determination and guts of the Ukrainian people. And just to conclude on a note that I think is important, people should understand that Vladimir Putin will keep going if he's not stopped in Ukraine. Talk to the Moldovans, the Poles, the Finns, the Swedes, the Baltic countries. They have lived face to face with Russia. They know what it's like to live under Russian rule. They don't want it. They know what it's like to try to resist Russian aggression. It will be coming if Putin is successful in Ukraine. And that's why they are so determined to aid Ukraine. It's not just Ukraine's security, it's theirs, and ultimately it's ours, because they are NATO allies. We will be committed to provide troops on the ground if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine. Right now, it's all on Ukraine. They're the ones who are bleeding and dying. They're the ones fighting. If we aid them, we can stop Putin and save ourselves not only money, but lives.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Coming up, parishioners of St. Michael the Archangel Ukrainian Catholic Church in New Haven will join us. We'll hear about their efforts to get food and medical aid into Ukraine. And later, a Connecticut resident living in Ukraine, will join us. This is Where We Live. Find us online at Where We Live. You can also email us at wherewelive@ctpublic.org or give us a call, 888-720-9677. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Years before Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Connecticut resident Carl Harvey wanted to do something to help. Although Carl had no direct ties to Ukraine himself, his late wife was Ukrainian, as was a family caretaker. After visiting the nation, he was inspired to start organizing. That was in 2016. Since then, he and other parishioners at St. Michael the Archangel Ukrainian Catholic Church in New Haven have organized to fundraise and send medical supplies, toys, and food to people in Ukraine. And Carl joins us now along with Myron Melnyk. They are both organizers with New Haven, Connecticut Ukrainian American Humanitarian Aid Fund. Thank you so much, Carl and Myron, for joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine, for inviting me.
And so Carl, I want to start with you here. We just heard a little bit about how this project got started for you. Can you tell us more details about that trip to Ukraine that you took and how you ended up visiting the nation?
My housekeeper, Nadia Ivansev, who lives in the Lviv area, was taking care of me after my wife passed away. And in February of 16, she told me that Vasily and I would like to go back home in August. But you hired me to take care of you. And if I'm in Ukraine and you're in the United States, that's not going to work. So get busy packing your bags.
And so can you...
And the 1st of August of 16, we were en route to Ukraine.
And do you remember what was the first thing you saw, or what were some of the first thoughts that went through your mind when you got there?
Well, Nadia still has very close ties with her family that lives in the Lviv region. So we're basically talking on the phone or communicating by emails. So I had somewhat of an idea of what was going on over there. And their son is actually an electrical engineer, who is the chief engineer at the international airport in Lviv. And one morning he was going into work, and his offices were to one end of the runway, and then there was a facility at the other end, which was aircraft maintenance facility. And that was the first rocket to hit something in Lviv. And that was about 1,000 feet away from him. So that's where it all started.
And I believe at the time you also toured a veterans hospital. Can you tell us what that experience was like?
Well, the person that we're dealing with in Ukraine is actually Nadia's son-in-law, who is an Orthodox priest, and a kind of right-hand man to Metropolitan Epiphany, who is the head of the Orthodox Church. And he lives about 3 blocks away from this veterans hospital in Melnyk. And he decided to take me over there to visit, and I had a tour of the facility and so forth. And I talked with the director and some of his staff members, and they asked me, is there anything that you can do to help us? And that's where it began. I came home, and we began to, with Myron's help, begin to organize, this organization to be able to send stuff over. And the first shipment went over towards the middle of 16. And ever since then, we've sent over about $10 million worth of supplies, equipment, food, and so on and so forth. And working with Father Roman, he is our contact person. Everything goes through him. He sends us messages of what he needs, based on requests that are coming from all over Ukraine, because he's in touch with everybody all over Ukraine. So,
And Myron, how did you get involved in this project in the first place?
Well, as Carl alludes, we have been working on helping Ukraine ever since the 2014 time frame, because really the war started back then. And I'm of Ukrainian ancestry, so my parents were very patriotic, and we were raised that way. And this is obviously a very important effort and a very important venture here. It's essentially good versus evil. So Carl and I are both veterans. We belong to the Ukrainian American Veterans, and we have a post here in New Haven. Carl is the commander. And we traveled to Ukraine to attend a veterans forum in 2018. We traveled to Kyiv, and at that time we had an opportunity to visit military hospitals, meet with veterans. At that time, this was before the full-scale invasion in 2022, but we have established connections. And so helping at this time with the full-blown war going on here is just kind of a natural extension of the work that we've been doing. And it's important to mention that Senator Blumenthal has been with us from the onset, going back to 2014 with the seizure of Crimea. And we've worked with Senator Blumenthal and his staff and other members of our congressional delegation to get legislation to help treat wounded Ukrainian soldiers. So a number of them, 20 some odd, have been brought over the years to Walter Reed Hospital in Washington for treatment. That program is still ongoing. And so thank you to Senator Blumenthal, thank you to Representative Courtney, Representative DeLauro, Senator Murphy. We're fortunate that our congressional delegation has been supportive of Ukraine throughout.
Well, and as you mentioned earlier, when the full-scale invasion happened in 2022, it was a natural extension of your organization to continue the support and continue the assistance. Were you surprised by how the community responded? Because it sounds like a lot of people wanted to support Ukraine.
I wasn't surprised about the reaction of the Ukrainian community, but what was really gratifying was the support of the American community. I remember when the war first started and we started gathering supplies to send to Ukraine. I remember traveling like on day 2 days after the war started, and seeing a row of cars just backed up around the corner and going into the lot and bringing what they could. Of course, this was winter time, so they were bringing warm clothes, they were bringing supplies, and it was really very gratifying to see the outpouring of support. And I think that speaks to the character of the Ukrainian people and the character of the American people, that they continue to uphold these principles of charity and support and welcome whoever needs assistance and try to provide that assistance.
Well, and Carl, earlier you talked about you were able to gather a lot of supplies to send overseas. Can you talk about some of the things that you were able to gather to ship?
In the beginning, it was anything that both civilians and military people could use. On the military side, we provided uniforms and winter equipment and so forth for the students in the military academy in Lviv. So that when they graduated, they'd be outfitted and ready to go to the front lines. We've been provided, as Myron mentioned, things like personal items, toothbrushes, and toys for the children in the orphanages, books, coloring books, coats, winter coats and winter underwear and so forth. More recently, however, due to the cost of shipping full containers over. We've decided to scale back our collection to just medical equipment and medical supplies. And the money we save on not sending over a full container, we're able to send to Father Roman, who established a fund in Ukraine, part of the Samaritan Fund, so that we can transfer money directly from our account into his account, so he can go out and buy medicines or provide a dehydrator to a person who owned a restaurant in Kharkiv and moved into his parish. And those are the types of things. We've also sent over vehicles, some of which went to the police chief of the city of Kyiv, so that he could pass them on to his son, who is a brigade commander down in the southern part of the country. So.
And Myron, beyond the individual donations, you've also partnered with many local hospitals. Can you describe how that partnership works and how did you start that?
Yes, there are doctors in the Yale New Haven Hospital who actually have a very active program called Doctors United for Ukraine, and they bring over doctors from Ukraine to observe and to be trained on specialized techniques which are needed now at that time of war. And when the war first started, these doctors reached out to us, and we were able to get supplies from the Yale New Haven hospital system. As you know, there are 6 hospitals in that system. It's not just the 2 here in New Haven, but it's Bridgeport, Greenwich, a couple others. So we were very willing to accept these supplies, and these formed the basis of our first shipments. And we have since that time reached out to other hospitals in Middletown, even in Massachusetts, and even in New Hampshire. So we have been able to bring over supplies for shipment from these states of New England. In addition to the supplies that we continue to provide, primarily medical, I should emphasize. We don't ship food per se, because fortunately there isn't a food shortage thus far in Ukraine that we're aware of. But in addition to that, we've done special projects. For example, a couple of winters ago, when the Russians knocked out power to an orphanage, we funded a commercial grade generator to provide heat and electricity for that orphanage in Ukraine. Just this last October, we had another special project whereby we support wounded soldiers in a military hospital in Ukraine who are undergoing mental health treatment, PTSD, mental health conditions. And they are being treated with a form of art therapy, something that's practiced here in the United States as well. And we brought over some of their art for sale here in New Haven. And we had an art show. And we raised a significant amount of money, and we sent that money to the hospital, to the volunteer who works there, and she is coordinating, the wise spending of that money for the needs of the hospital and some of the patients that are being treated there in Zhytomyr. So we do these one-off projects as well. And as Carl mentioned, we're currently getting requests for specialized medications that are in short supply. And we provide money to purchase that medication.
Well, you mentioned Doctors United for Ukraine, and actually ahead of this hour, we spoke with Dr. Andrei Zinchuk, who is the Vice President and Director of Doctors United for Ukraine at Yale, and this year has brought many new challenges for physicians in Ukraine. Here's what he shared with us.
We're very proud of the program that we're doing, facial reconstruction, on training Ukrainian physicians on how to reconnect the blood vessels and the nerves and reconstruct the bony structures in the face for the civilians and the soldiers, wounded soldiers who have had their faces devastated by the war, so that they can smile again, drink again, smell again, and participate again in social activities. And then lastly, we are working on a online resource for mental health training for individuals in Ukraine to help deal with suicide prevention, post-traumatic care, post-traumatic stress disorder, and also moral injury.
Myron, on top of what you just shared and after what we just heard from Dr. Andrei Zinchuk, there's a lot of conflict and turmoil happening in the world right now. And with 4 years past since the full-scale invasion, what does sustaining not just donations, but awareness of this conflict look like?
I think, unfortunately, in recent months, the visibility of the situation in Ukraine has decreased because of all these other events going on, all these distractions and potential wars and attacks in Venezuela and Iran. But I believe that in the end, justice will prevail. You know, truth has a way of surfacing and dominating eventually. So we don't know how this war is going to end. It's possible that there will be some kind of division of territory for a while, as did happen in Germany, as continues to happen in Korea. There are other places. Sudan is another place that was partitioned for a while. But in the end, justice, I think, will prevail, and we're hopeful. We don't know about the timeline, we don't know about the details, but I think that not only the people of the United States, but the people of the world, but by the way, overwhelmingly support Ukraine. If you watch the Olympics opening ceremony, the largest applause was given to the small delegation of Ukrainian athletes as they walked into the chamber there, the big Coliseum where the opening ceremonies were being conducted. So long term, we're hopeful and optimistic, and we'll continue to do what we can to help.
And before the show, we also spoke with Alex Kuzma, who is the Chief Development Officer for the Ukrainian Catholic University Foundation and also music director of the Ukrainian Vocal Ensemble.
When we speak with our friends every week, we have Zoom calls with our colleagues in the Ukrainian Catholic University, and we're always amazed at how upbeat and optimistic they are in spite of everything. And that's not because they haven't suffered losses and personal tragedies. And personally, in my family, two of my nephews have been killed on the front lines. So we're painfully aware of just how senseless this war has been. But we're trying to show as much solidarity as we can with people in Ukraine.
And Carl, amid all the support and solidarity, and I think a sense of optimism from people, what do you want others to understand about the war in Ukraine and the Ukrainian community here in Connecticut?
Well, in broadcasts such as this, and we've also participated in another TV program with a group that we're working with up in the Groton area. And the art show also had broad announcements. And we are also going to have another art show with some of those other paintings which we didn't sell before in Brantford at the Boca Gallery on Main Street in Brantford. And the publicity which they put out for that also attracts other people. One point I would like to make is you drive around the state of Connecticut and Massachusetts and so forth, they're always coming across Ukrainian flags or we support Ukraine banners or whatever. So there's a lot of support, behind the scenes, which we try to tap into. So.
And are there any supplies or donations you need right now? And how can our listeners find out more if they would like to help?
The main supplies and equipment which we can use are things like walkers, crutches, hospital beds, and in some cases, those types of things. We will be sending over our next shipment, hopefully by the end of March or beginning of April. And we have a collection center at St. Michael's Ukrainian Catholic Church, 569 George Street, which we accept things. It's generally going to be open on Tuesday afternoons, about 3 to 7 o'clock. Anybody who would like to drop something off, they can give me a call on my cell phone at 203-848-4860. I'll be happy to take. And we also receive a lot of things from personal people that their relatives or something that passed away, unfortunately, and they will bring things to us to increase what we have to send over. So.
Well, thank you so much for that information, Carl. We will have all of this information for our listeners on our website at ctpublic.org/wherewelive. I want to take some time to thank Carl Harvey for joining us this morning, as well as Myron Melnyk. They are both organizers for the New Haven, Connecticut Ukrainian American Humanitarian Aid Fund. Thank you so much, Carl and Myron, for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Coming up, Larissa Bobby is a Connecticut native and writer living in Ukraine. Her book is A Kind of Refugee, the story of an American who refused to leave Ukraine. We'll be hearing from her. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today marks 4 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Thousands of civilians have died and millions have been displaced since the start of the war. Connecticut native Larissa Bobby had remained in the nation, working as a writer, translator, and dancer. Her book is A Kind of Refugee, the story of an American who refused to leave Ukraine. And she joins us now from Ukraine. Larissa, welcome back to Where We Live.
Thank you, Catherine, for having me on the show.
Well, I wanted to start off by asking a pretty big question here, but how have you been doing?
That's a great question. First off, I want to express my gratitude and appreciation for you, to you for putting together this show, even just in this past half hour, meeting in virtual space Senator Blumenthal and Carl and Myron, and being together with people from Connecticut who are supporting Ukraine. It really means a lot to be able to see each other. I think in the absolute kind of melee and chaos in the world that we live in, it's very challenging, both in a reality, like a kind of a visceral reality where we have power cuts this past week. I've been incredibly lucky because we have had power 24/7 in Lviv, which is where I'm living temporarily this month. I'm crashing on a friend's couch, living out of a backpack, and I feel like I'm living in the lap of luxury. It's quite different than the conditions that I left behind in my home in Kyiv. And what Russia's most recent airstrikes and focus on attacking critical civilian infrastructure, power generation plants, the networks which provide the power from the plants to people's homes, heating systems. It's created a situation where really it's like you wake up in the morning, you don't know when you'll have electricity, when you won't have electricity, even though the power company has been doing its best to provide schedules. The power doesn't necessarily go on and off according to the schedule that they give you in real time on your phone. So there's a lot of kind of constant adaptation that a person has to adapt to dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and this is not the first time we're having this conversation. We've had several since the invasion started, and you have shared the need to adapt when you first moved there, and the things that are so different there. And so since then, have you seen any changes for the better or for worse, really? Has it been the same? Has it gone up or down, or what has that been like?
I think there are two related things. If we're going to talk on the level of like individual Ukrainians who remain in Ukraine, who are surviving these very unnatural, extremely unnatural conditions, unnatural and, humanly created by the actions of the political nation, the Russian Federation. Ukrainians have shown great resilience in order to be able to survive. For example, I did spend the month of January on the left bank of Kyiv, where I live. And by the middle of the month, the temperatures in my apartment inside were 44 degrees Fahrenheit. In order to wash myself, I would either travel, pack a bag and go travel to a different part of the city an hour away to go use a friend's hot shower, or you run the cold water from the tap, fill a pot, heat it on the gas burner on your stove, quickly peel off all your clothes, wash from a basin, and then put your clothes back on again as fast as possible. And those, again, are adaptations. It takes a lot more time than when you're living in conveniences, but you also start to learn that electricity is not like the wellspring of my existence. What I've also seen in this past month, although it's been consistent, I would say throughout the full-scale invasion of the war and before then, is something in Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian sensibility, is just an extreme amount of generosity and people willing to help each other. For example, when the news came out that it was so cold in Kyiv and people were living without power and heat, my friends who are serving in the armed forces in the Kharkiv region in the east, they happen to perform their missions. They drive out to places by car, but they live in a house. And they were like, come visit us. We're going to heat you up. You can wash. And, it's just incredible. These people are already protecting my life and, my entire country. And they also want to protect my person. And there's a lot of that kind of sharing, even when you're strapped for resources. People find it in themselves to find something that they can give to their neighbor who has a little bit less.
Well, and you've also shared with us before that there's always been a sense of hope and this spirit of unity. And after 4 years, it sounds like you are still seeing that same hope and optimism as we've been hearing, but are you seeing that same spirit and unity from the beginning of the war, from your neighbors and your friends and the people that you're working with and the people that you're helping?
It's changed a lot. I think there was a word that actually Senator Blumenthal said it as well, this word galvanize. When I think of the individual Ukrainians that I know who are my friends and communities and neighbors, I think each of us in our own way, we've been through a process where you kind of have to almost like you've burned off excess baggage, whatever it be. There are just things, when you are forced to deal with extremely challenging situations, you discover in yourself, on the one hand, resources and powers that you may not have known you had. You also reach your limits. It's very humbling. You make mistakes, you screw things up, you lose things that are very dear to you, you lose people that are very dear to you. And when you have that experience of finality and mortality, it changes you. And in some sense, it perhaps also sharpens you. I think there's a sense of vitality that people find in Ukrainians, especially today. They find it in the culture scene. They might be surprised to see dancing and theater and cafes, not only in cities like Kyiv, but even in cities closer to the front lines in Kharkiv. And Zaporizhia has had some very interesting exhibitions that I physically have not traveled to go see, but this is a city that's very close to the front lines, and yet there are cultural events happening there that weren't happening 10 years ago. So there's this sort of intensification of everything. But I have to say that on the flip side, this past year and almost a half at this point, more than the past year, has been really difficult with losing a secure sense of support from the United States as a country. It's wonderful to have individual American politicians and so many individual American citizens, like Senator Blumenthal, like our Ukrainian community in Connecticut, who continue to steadfastly support Ukraine. But the actions of the US government have been very inconsistent. And that kind of inconsistency, policy positions which seem to be more bent on creating discord with allies and partners than working together to defeat the common enemy, which is the Russian Federation. Sorry, wait a minute.
I was just going to ask, based on your experience, we only have about 2 minutes left here, but what would you tell your people here in Connecticut? What do you want them to understand better?
I want them to understand that for all of the beauty in that the Ukrainian people are demonstrating and this resilience and vitality, we're mortal human beings. And everything that we can do as individuals and as communities has its limits. This is a political conflict. Ukraine was invaded by a neighboring country, and Ukrainians are fighting to protect their country, to make their country more secure. And in order to secure Ukraine as a nation, we need military support and we need allyship from other countries in Europe, in the United States, around the world. And that's a position that has to be consistent both diplomatically and in actions. And it needs to be consistent, again, both between individual citizens and their own government. I think that Ukrainians are demonstrating a kind of commitment to their country. And I hope that what we're doing here is something that Americans can look at and also see as a form of partnership, that it is possible to hold your government accountable for its actions and to demand that it acts in the interests of the citizens. It has to be a partnership.
Well, I hate to ask you this in 30 seconds, but the title of your book is A Kind of Refugee, the story of an American who refused to leave Ukraine. Can you tell our listeners in 30 seconds, why do you stay in Ukraine?
I think it's precisely for that reason. It's the Ukrainian people are the people with whom I've built relationships. They've showed me about neighborliness, about cooperation, about democracy in a very basic way. I've learned more about kind of how to live together in a political nation, even if it's an ideal we're striving towards, from these particular people than from anybody else.
Well, thank you so much for always spending time with us and sharing your story with us. You've been listening to Larissa Bobby, who is a Connecticut native and writer, translator, and dancer living in Kyiv, Ukraine. You can find links to her book and Substack, A Kind of Refugee, by visiting akindofrefugee2022.substack.com. Thank you so much, Larissa. Always appreciate your time.
Thank you, Catherine.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.